Instead of creating one giant Tearout base for this project file, I actually went ahead and layered 5 samples from SDS117 Will It Tear Out. And this may look a little familiar to you guys. This is from last week's series. I basically took a bunch of random recordings and tried to see if they would tear out. Some of them did, some of them didn't, some of them torn in, some of them torn sideways, you know how it goes. But it was a fun little project. If you want to check that out, that's last week's video. And so yeah, that was a fun time. But yeah, basically these samples are from that pack. Went ahead and created 5 tracks and then grouped those tracks into its own base layer. And I also went ahead and separated this base layer from the sub. The reason why I did that is because I like to have a nice clean separate sub from the base layers, and also because I like to add other processing effects inside of the group, and at the end I just go ahead and cut all the sub frequencies inside of that group just to get a nice clean sound from the layers and the sub. Before I go ahead and dive in, I want to show you guys each sound separately. So here is layer 1. Here is layer 2. Here is layer 3. Here is layer 4. Here is layer 5. And then finally, of course, the sub. Sorry, it may sound a bit gritty because I have the sidechain on. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. But yeah, here's the sub. And then here is the sound all together. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in.
I hope you like your bases stacked.
So this is the fun part about the sample pack, is that I could just go ahead and drag and drop these samples into the tracks, and I don't really have to do too much processing because each sample already has character. So I went ahead and turned off all the processing in the layer base here, so that way I can show you an A and B of what the samples sound like before and after. And as you can see, as I click on every sample, all of them have EQ8s on them, just cleaning up the low end, so that way it's not fighting with the sub later on. Group 5 here though does have a little bit of processing, and it's just some reverb and EQ. I have 3 EQs here, cutting the low end. So for our first group here, you can see I just put a high pass EQ. Without the EQ8, it sounds like this. And as you can hear, there is quite a bit of sub. But yeah, the EQs are just cleaning up that sub frequency. Same thing for the second track, except there's 2 EQs to kind of cut a little bit of the highs and of course to clean up the sub. So without it, it sounds like this. Again, quite a bit of sub, but I wanted to shape the sound a bit. And then just to make sure there's no more sub, I added another EQ8 with a high pass. Another reason why I sometimes add 2 EQ8s is because if I'm adding other effects, especially saturation, it's going to always add harmonics. So I always add 2 EQ8s depending on the sound to make sure those extra harmonics in the low end aren't being heard as much. But yeah, same thing for track number 3 without it. And then I wanted to shape that sound, and I did this little bell shape with the EQ8. And here is sample 4 without EQ8. And then same thing, added a sort of bell shape. And sample 5 is a little bit interesting. I'm going to go ahead and just group these really quickly. So without the processing, and then with it. And for these samples, I actually went ahead and pitched it up by plus 12 semitones. And inside of the chain, I wanted to add a lot of reverb. Just going to go ahead and ungroup this. And so there's not much decay going on with this sample. I didn't want it to decay too much, just kind of wanted it to fill the sound a little bit more with this reverb. And then for the EQ8s, of course, just adding high pass to make sure there are no sub frequencies. And then all together, they fit pretty nicely. And with the processing after, with the snap heap and the EQ8, sounds like this. We'll go ahead and dive into the snap heap here.
What are you doing over there? Come join the group, you silly Billy.
So even though the samples sound amazing by themselves, I went ahead and added more processing after, and I kind of want to show you guys what each effect is adding to this group processing here. And so all it is a snap heap and an EQ8 to cut the sub frequencies after the effects. We're going to go ahead and open this snap heap up, and I'm going to go ahead and just turn off every effect and go through each one individually. Actually, before we do that, I want to show you a before and after of what it all sounds like together. So without the group processing, it sounds like this. And then with the group processing, it sounds like this. So yeah, it just gives it a little bit of a boost. Okay, so for our first effect in this group processing inside of Snap Heap, I went ahead and added a saturator. I just wanted to fatten the sound up a bit, and so without it, it sounds like this. And then with the shaper, it sounds like this. And as you can hear, it is a little bit messier, but we go ahead and clean that up later on in the chain. I also went ahead and added a 3-band EQ. I wanted to boost the highs around 2 decibels, and so it sounds like this without 3-band. And then with it, it's a very subtle effect. It's not really too much. And then inside of our snap heap, to add more room to our samples, I went ahead and did parallel processing with a convolver. And then at the end of our parallel bus 1 here, I added a high pass filter. And so without the snap heap parallel process convolver, it sounds like this. And then with it, it sounds like this. I also wanted to fade out the impulse response of our convolver here so it doesn't leave much of a tail with the reverb. Also went ahead and turned up the tone of our convolver, and I lowered down the volume of our parallel bus here. And finally, of course, a high pass filter, so without it, it sounds like this. Quite a bit of low end, and then with the high pass filter, it sounds like this. Just gets rid of that low end muddiness to clean up the sound a bit. And then for this next effect, I went ahead and added an OTT, and all that's doing is just pushing the sound even more. And so without the sound, or without the effect, it sounds like this. And then with the effect, it sounds like this. So it's at 38%. If I were to go ahead and push this all the way to 100%, I didn't want too much of the effect, but I did want quite a bit. So 38 was pretty good for me. And so, of course, with all these effects stacked on top of each other, I wanted to go ahead and clean it up with a slice EQ. And what I did here was cut the muddy frequencies, which is around the 250 hertz range. And I went ahead and added a peak filter, turned down the gain by a lot, and then I turned down the Q. And so without our slice EQ getting rid of those muddy frequencies, it sounds like this. And with our slice EQ, it sounds like this. And then finally, in our group processing, I added a high pass with Ableton's stock EQ8 to get rid of those low frequencies. So without it, there is quite a bit of sub, but with it, and you know, it's kind of funny because every track has a high pass on it for each sample, and you can still hear quite a bit of the sub being brought out because of the effects that we have inside of this snap heap. So again, without the EQ8, if I even go ahead and drag a new EQ8, you can see the sub frequencies. And so yeah, that's quite a bit of sub there. And of course, that's going to be clashing with the separate sub that we added. So personally, I like to add a high pass after adding effects inside of a group because, of course, when you do add effects, it's just going to bring out more of those frequencies. And so that's all this EQ8 is doing, is just cutting those lows. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into that sub.
Do you like bass frequencies? Well, you'll like this part. Actually, it's just a plain sine wave, but check this out.
So the sub is really nothing special. It's just a plain Serum 2 triangle wave. I went ahead and turned down the phase randomization to 0, so that way it's not all over the place. And I just put a low pass filter with filter 1. Without it, it sounds like this. And then with it, it sounds like this. So I just put that there to kind of clean up the sub a bit more. The reason why it sounds a bit more aggressive when I turn off the filter is because of the processing happening inside of the master chain. I was going to put some tube distortion on it, it would still sound pretty cool with it, but yeah, I never used tube distortion. There's no effects on here, just a plain triangle wave with a low pass filter on it. And I have this utility on here. This is doing some side chaining. As you can see, it's just happening at certain parts of the track. But yeah, together the sub and the layered basses sound like this. I like to have the sub separated. Sometimes it sounds good if I group them all together, and then other times it doesn't really sound so good. But in this case, I just went ahead and separated the layers and the sub.
It's like they say, just recycle.
So this is the more fun part of the track, is once you got everything mixed and everything fits together, then you can go ahead and harvest your samples, I guess I could kind of say. And so you can reuse some of the samples that you have made from your track. So for example, I'll probably use this intro part. I'm going to go ahead and click on resample for our audio track here, and I'm just going to take this. I think that might be pretty interesting to use in another track, and then maybe this part. And personally, I like to just mess with the pitch of the sample, but I can go ahead and turn this down and create something completely new. And maybe I can mess with the warp mode, so maybe something like texture, kind of mess with the grain size. And then I can go ahead and take my other sample over here and maybe mess with that. And I always thought the bass drop would be a pretty good percussion, so maybe I can do something like this. Maybe this can be like a cool little filler. Oh, snap. Okay, plane crash? No, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say that. That's, anyways, yeah, this would be a cool filler. I want to encourage you guys to always try and get creative with your tracks, and even reusing tracks to create sample packs, just so you can get the most out of your loops and create something completely new that you can reuse later on.
Is this the end?
I hope you guys have been enjoying, and I want to thank you guys for watching. If you want these exact bass samples and the full Ableton project, that's all on my Patreon. That's where I keep the sounds I actually use. But yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one. Adios.